for sure.
Thank you. Yeah.
So yes, that fluidity thing just loosens that tyranny of the superego, both on ourselves, of judging ourselves for being anxious or ego defended at times, or being stuck in a particular stance. I mean, I know if I go and have to work in a banking executive team, I suddenly become all knowledge defending and go to the performing level, where I'm in a stance of trying to look clever, and I've got all these models and frameworks, and it's all about my ego and being validated and feeling insecure. Is this client gonna think I'm legit? And that's a very trapped state. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of self-consciousness. And I don't mean that in the spiritual sense. I mean that cringy, uncomfortable sense of, oh my God, what are they looking at? My voice, and that state of self-consciousness is so uncomfortable. And it's almost the opposite of a flow state. So as I'm getting a bit sidetracked here, but basically, yeah, the fluid state of some contexts are going to put us in that more constricted state, and in other contexts, we're going to feel more expanded. And if we are kind to ourselves and notice that, allow for it, and don't let our superego trash us about it, we're also going to have much more gentle expectations of our teachers, leaders, and people in these so-called spiritual communities where, I mean, I've got a very strong 6 wings, so I've got massive skepticism about these teachers, and I've experienced the dark side of many of them, having been involved in various spiritual communities in my life. That, there's big light, big shadow. I would never, ever leave my children alone with a priest, for example. And I'm sorry if there are Christians in the room, but that's how it is. I don't trust people who set themselves up as guides because of big light, big shadow. And I think, I don't know, my paradigm is that if you came to Earth, you're here to learn how to grapple with the fact that your ego and your shadow is your constant companion. And I think that's one of the things that the Enneagram teaches us, is one truckload of humility around the fact that that vice, that passion is here all the time. And Julia has sometimes said it on our other training courses, that we're all just hustling for self-esteem. And I love that phrase, because it's true. Our ego strategy, and maybe I can move on to the Enneagram here. Our ego strategy is to win us security and belonging, mainly. Our ego strategy is a program for happiness that we've kind of installed to help us survive. So it's a very primary program. And if you look at some of the spiritual teachings, it's informed by a lie. For example, I am what people say about me. So when we're in our ego state, we're fully consumed with the lie of who I am is defined by how I'm being perceived. So that particular one would be the heart center. For the 2, 3, and 4, there's a preoccupation with how I'm seen and perceived. So then all of that stuff would kick in at the lower ego levels. Is, am I clever enough? Do I do the right people think good things of me? Do I belong to the right in groups? So it's all the stuff at the lower levels that is going to kick in there. So it's about, am I getting the results? Do people think I'm getting the results? Do I fit in? So, in the heart center, those would be how those questions would play out. In the action center, it's about the doing. And in the thinking center, it's, what do I have? Do I have enough knowledge? Do I have the right ideology as a 6? Am I part of the right club? Am I under the protection of the right strong leader? And with 7, it's various other forms of gluttony that give an illusion of security. So, yeah, I think with any of the systems, if we deal with them with legitimacy, and if they are true to themselves, they have a built-in teaching of the fact that we can't transcend our ego. And that's an interesting aspect of the teachings that is quite paradoxical and often gets lost. So I want to just stop there for a second because I feel as though I'm using a lot of convoluted jargon, and I want to just stop and see how everybody's thinking. I see some of you nodding. So Nicola, maybe you nodded quite a few times. I want to test with you. What are you hearing? What's making you nod?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way you are expressing that ego strategy, I think there's a real reality check to this thing being right here, because I think that when we lose sight of that, then we end up on a tangent that's very much disconnected from reality. And so what you were saying earlier on about this being a way of being able to relate to reality in a more true and objective way, part of that is seeing this thing here the whole time.
Wow. I mean, that's profound, because what you're saying there is the shadow is part of reality. We need to include it completely in our awareness of what's going on. That's really helpful. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting you. Carry on.
I was nodding a lot when you were just talking about the heart center as an Enneagram 2, and reflecting on a memory of being a teenager and having a grapple of almost like a multitude of TVs out, and thinking about every person I knew's view of me, and desperately trying to think about how the people who didn't think well of me, what was I to do to get them to think well of me? Because I knew that mosaic of impression was who I was.
Wow. That is such a brilliant explanation of 2. That your identity equals this array of TV screens. That you don't actually have an inner sense of who you are. It's what people say is you, and how they feel about you is you. That's incredibly profound insight, because that then helps us to understand what the line to 4 actually means. It means accessing some sense of identity that comes from within. That the virtue there is equanimity, because your feelings are not going to be swayed back and forth by people's reactions on those TVs. And you're going to have a sense of your holy origin in 4 that is grounded in something infinite and deeply mysterious and silent, and it's very much from within. So then you're not what people say you are. What are you then? You're an emanation of the divine mystery. So your expanded ego identity in that space would come from a completely different conception of yourself and reality.
Yeah.
And it would include an awareness of your shadow. And can you tell me more, because you said something about objectivity. How would that awareness that you are not made of 1,000 TV screens, facial expressions, how would that be more objective as a way of connecting with your experience?
So there's something in the wordlessness of the experience that has less, it has more center and less slanting. I don't know if that's it. Yeah, there's something, and there's something in the, you know, I mean, I remember in this grapple of the TV screens having a real kind of teenager's nightmare of to make this one like me is to behave in this way, and to make that one like me, I would have to do the opposite. So how do I do that? How do I reconcile that? Until eventually it drives you mad, and then you go mad, and then you have to find something else that feels truer than that.
Wow.
And that's the dive in.
That's so radical, because the word you use is distortion. And that is an epistemological word. That is about knowledge. So the opposite of clear knowing for me is distortion. The opposite of truth is distortion. And there's this cool thing in one of the sacred texts about falsehood is multiple and truth is singular. So when you're in a state of centered or pure awareness, there's one truth, and that is the truth of who you are. I often like in my coaching to say, what would it be like if you stood your ground and spoke the truth and let the dice fall? And I think that's very true for twos, is what does that even mean? To stand my ground and speak my truth and see what happens. And I suppose that's the definition of holy freedom for a two, is that you're free of what other people think, because you're actually speaking from that one truthful place, as opposed to the distortions and the adaptations and contortions that you have to adopt in order to elicit the right response from the TVs. So there, clarity, objectivity, appreciating the shadow, and I would imagine it involves stepping back from the constriction and the nightmare suffering of the ego defending approach, like the self-protecting at the so-called lower end of this ladder. You know, I mean, that it's very self-protecting and conforming to have the TV screens. You know, you're conforming to other people's sense of what you need to be. You're trying to belong. You're trying to be liked. You're trying to protect yourself from rejection. You're trying to preempt rejection. So there, you're trapped in this terrible state of constriction and suffering. And then as you start becoming aware of your own being and connectedness to something cosmic and to the singular, more universal sense of what's true, then there's like an ease that sets in. Does that reflect something of what you're hearing, or what I'm hearing, what you're saying?
Yeah. There's something foundationally unchanging, even as,
So the foundationally unchanging sounds very much to me like the spiritual language of pure awareness. That there's pure awareness which doesn't change when you are in a state of oneness. And then there are all these ripples and chaos and whatever that happen within another part of ourselves. Like in Enneagram language, I sometimes like to think there's pure awareness that's at the center. And within the center, you're experiencing the world through a particular state of awareness. So the holy ideas are a way of thinking about reality. And then the virtues are the feelings associated with that way of seeing.
Mm.
And that's at the center when you're in yourself, when you're in that one center. And then slightly further out, in your survival suit, in your ego strategy, which is this very self-protecting layer, it's your spacesuit. You've got all this chaos of envy and vanity and deception and the multiplicity of, it's not the one true thing. It's okay, in this context, I better be like this. Oh, I better look careful. I better look clever. I better make friends with that one. Oh shit, I better get this thing done because otherwise so there's a lot of constriction and chaos and suffering that goes on in this outer layer that is trying to protect us from feeling pain or being rejected.
Mm.
So the path on this chart, if you look at this picture, this is a map of the self as well in some way. So you can use this to self-evaluate, oh, where am I? Oh, I'm doing this, I'm performing, defending, or whatever. So we can use this structure to think about what's going on with ourselves, or we can choose this structure to think about what's going on with ourselves. And they're both models of transcendence. They're both kind of maps or recipes or guidelines, or you can think of them in multiple ways, but they're both giving you something. Here you are. Here's a tool, a map, a mirror that you can use to self-reflect on where am I today? Where am I 5 minutes ago? And where would I like to be? And where do I feel nice? And how do I get there? So with the AIM work that we did on that training, we got quite a lot there on what it feels like to be at different stages, how to know where we are, how to know where others are, and then how to help people, how to help them move through the stages and to recognize where they're constricted and where they're suffering and why they're suffering. And as a coach, to say, to the performing, defending person who's stuck with their little 7 steps of whatever and their little life raft of some model that they're using, to help them to move into trusting their inner world more and being able to go into facilitating or coaching with no model. Well, I'm not going to take you through that script anymore. I'm going to sit with you as a person and I'm going to say, Nicola, I'm getting the vibe that you're stressed. What's happening? Because I'm trusting my heart's relationship to your heart. So when a coach goes from performing to internalizing, they're not going to be relying on tools anymore. They're going to be relying on their own personal presence and their ability to relate to you in a very ambiguous space. And that's the difference between those two levels, is your sense of identity has become more stable. Like you're talking about, it's more foundational, it's more real, it is more objective because you're not morphing according to all these external things anymore. So I want to stop there again and just check in. What are we hearing? Julia, I want to invite you to add anything.
This coming from an existential perspective, just, because Ingrid, you've got the brain that holds 15 million different methodologies. So I just want to have another one just to look brainy. But this idea of being buffeted around by the world to try and be and do something, it's very much an existential idea in that sense. It's obviously an Enneagram and an ego development idea, but this kind of huge requirement and the spinning of the head thing. And, you know, in this business of being buffeted about, you know, we are very happy to give up quite a lot of ourselves.
But do we even know that we're giving anything up?
No, but I mean, in my small experience on this call already, 3 emails, 2 WhatsApps, and I was reduced to the smallest part of myself as a child, my most shameful being. And I actively gave up the bits of me that were okay. And just languaging it like that kind of helps me go backwards and forwards a little bit and stay fluid, because I don't think that, you know, it's not necessarily a possibility for me to live permanently at higher level.
That would be self-deception.
Yeah. So I just like the idea of moving, being fluid, and being able to call on different parts of me, and mainly just the great relief of being able to notice, oof, I've become small. Let me see if I can just get a little bit bigger and have that fluidity. I mean, it's probably because we both have got so much Enneagram 7 going on that we just love this idea. But the thing of being in pain, being stuck in pain, we don't have to be.
Yeah. Yes. And I think there's a beautiful cognitive scientist who I worship named John Vervaeke, and he speaks about how a lot of human evolution is about the development of psychotechnologies. That's what he calls it. And I sometimes call it thoughtware. So a psychotechnology is something that helps us to change our own thinking, which is a miraculous thing that humans are capable of doing. And the expanded identity work is a psychotechnology that you can use to notice, oh shit, I'm so contracted, I'm so unhappy, I'm suffering, my heart feels like a contracted pebble. And the Enneagram is another psychotechnology. So you think about these things that have emerged at some point in human history to help us think about our own thinking. I mean, it's completely phenomenal to me that humans have developed psychotechnologies, one after the other, and they keep on getting better and more sophisticated. And, you know, it's a phenomenal thing about being human. I mean, even the fact that we can start a session with a meditation with the purpose of, well, for me, it's being able to not be nervous, to be able to be present, to not be self-conscious. I don't want to be sitting here thinking, oh, there's these 20 screens, like you were saying, Nicola. I don't want to do that. I want to be in flow and talk about the things that I'm passionate about. So we've got the psychotechnology of meditation. We've got the psychotechnologies of the Enneagram. We've got mindfulness. We've got yoga. We've got Tai Chi. There are multiple systems available to us whose purpose is to change our state of awareness and to help us find ego transcendence. I mean, that's what these technologies are ultimately about, is they're going to make us feel better. But part of that feel better is actually transcending, seeing the bigger picture, changing our map, realizing that we're 3 years old when we're in the contracted state, and being able to do something about it. So, yeah, I think that fluidity point that you're making is so crucial, Julia. And you used some words there that I really love. So being fluid, the being responsive. And for me, Nicola, that links back to objectivity completely. Because if we're rigid and we're in a stance and we're in our ego strategy, like maybe as a 7, I think that I've got to be entertaining all the time. And I'm so stuck in that persona that I'm actually disconnected from the needs of the moment. I won't be able to listen. I won't be able to be empathic. You know, if something arises that calls for empathy, I can't get close to it. So it's how do we stay fluid and responsive to the reality of the moment and live fully into that reality in a way that isn't stuck in a stance. And it's a very core archetype in our human culture of this idea of fluidity and vitality and creativity versus stuckness and rigidity. Did you ever see that movie, As It Is in Heaven?
Yeah, yay!
That is my favorite movie on this planet, and that deals with this archetype of stuckness and fluidity and our creative vitality and how that can get stuck in a stance. So that woman's husband, who's the priest, the rigidity, the dogma, the blocking of creative evolution, and how that whole movie is about how that gets shattered. And what emerges from the shattering of the stance and the breaking of rigidity, the breaking of rigid ego structures, and what people think is love. That what you find when you break out of rigidity is more and more creativity and love, which for me is basically, there don't need to be all these words, God, love, creativity. There's only one word, love. So that I think is pretty fundamental to what you're saying, Julia, is fluid and responsive. How do I stay responsive?
Mm.
And that, I suppose, that is another word for objective. Objective doesn't mean I've got an idea and there it is. It means, am I actually attuned to what's going on? It's much more of a process consciousness. And you're talking about the existential piece is existentialism is about a living process that being is becoming. Can you tell us more about this idea of spinning of the head and buffeted?
Yes, I'd love to also make another comment, so my research on stuckness, so if I was going to just, now I've handed it in, I don't have to like try and be credible anymore. I'm just going to wing it. I'm going to make up shit and just throw it at you. And so if we are all present, if all of ourselves is being represented, we have a greater chance of reading the world fairly objectively in your language and responding to it. But if we've narrowed down our identity to the sliver, there's no ways we can interpret the magnitude of the world. And that's the essence of stuckness translated into this context. And how happy we are to trade away huge parts of ourselves for safety and I mean, even like the leaders that trade away for material stuff are actually quite limited. It's quite interesting. People do, but it's kind of safety and the responsibility, which is just absolutely overwhelming, of coming out into the world as who we are.
Radical.
It's a radical responsibility. Yeah. So it's that. So we'd rather have this narrow and more vulnerable sense of ourselves, because it's only premised on like two little slithers of ourselves. So when the waves come and start buffeting us, we get buffeted. But if we have a more robust self that is used to holding our shame more actively and balancing it with our beauty, then maybe we have greater chance of survival or recovery or fluidity. I don't know how you want to think about that.
There's such beautiful threads in what you're saying. That as we become more ourselves and we don't have this narrow identity based on slivers of leftovers of ourselves after we've traded everything away for security, that we can hold more. Like you speak about holding shame, that we are big enough, our identity is expanded enough to hold shame, to hold beauty, so that when we're in a situation where we're worried about being judged, we don't really mind being judged because we've already assimilated the fact that we're an asshole. you know, and it's okay because we know that everyone else is too. And we
Yeah.
look upon ourselves and others with self-compassion, and we create more space for everybody to bring more of themselves into the picture. And as that happens, kaboom, wonders of wonders, we are able to discover more of what's real, get more real. I mean, that's actually quite an interesting thing, is that we talk about let's get real. It means that we're allowing more in. And if you look at the Enneagram, the emotional realness is a triad of where we're going to let in shadow, we're going to acknowledge shadow, and it's a foundation for empathy. So we're not going to be able to have a truthful conversation unless we can hold discomfort and shame and expand our egos to include more. Can we include more? Like Julia did earlier. So imagine we'd all been sitting here and we want to lecture on how to be enlightened. And you all arrived here thinking, oh, I better act enlightened because the session is about ego transcendence. And we all start saying, yeah, I once had this experience of, you know, whatever. Then we would have a very shallow and constricted session. And Julia bringing in the fact of, oh my God, I feel like a 2-year-old, you know, and I'm constricted and I'm so small, suddenly allowed more in. And that's because Julia is able to disclose that because she's able to hold it. She's not defending what she imagines your idea of her is. So you can see what just happened today by virtue of the fact that we have even if we just had one person in the room able to say, I'm feeling so unenlightened, it already, suddenly we all feel like, oh, more of me is welcome. I can also be unenlightened. And that creates a lot more love and beauty and reality than we might have had otherwise. So I'm really glad that we've got a living example of expansion right here for us to see the difference between constricted, defending, and like, well, we're here. Let's see what's going on.
Thank you.
And there's a rest that happens in it. I mean, I was very interested in the metaphor you used of the spinning of the head, and it jarred me. It made me scared because I kind of know what it means experientially, but I'm interested in where it comes from and where you got it, basically.
It's very like the Nicola and the Enneagram 2 TVs. It's checking out how I'm being read and trying to adapt that. And you know, so for the 8, it's kind of like monitoring the world, monitoring. Okay. Have they got to asshole yet? Okay, they're in asshole. Fine. Okay, so those TVs now have turned off. Right. Okay, who's left? Okay, it's just the 2 of us. So it's quite tough.
That is tough. And that's a really helpful way of thinking. It's like, is my head spinning, trying to notice what's going on with everyone all the time and what I need to do? And that's very different. It's a very different kind of vigilance and monitoring to trying to stay with the moment, to stay. That Thich Nhat Hanh, I keep saying it, the Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, he says, may I live fully into this day. And for me, that's like, how do I sink in to the reality of what's happening right here, right now, as opposed to, you know, the worrying that goes along with the spinning of the head. And I think if we were to look at the Enneagram and say, what does spinning of the head mean for each different Enneagram type? So Julia's described for the 8, it's like, who thinks I'm an asshole? Who's going to reject me? Who's going to take me on? And it would be different for each subtype. You know, how are you constructing your ego in the moment? How are you trying to train people to see you? We're very busy in the Enneagram training people how to see us. I mean, that's a big part of our ego strategy, is training people how to see us and treat us so that we can hide in something static. And I joke about it, I call it free range. You know, if we're having a conversation with someone and we aren't training them, then where are we even? What the hell is going on? You don't know what's going on. You're kind of in this ambiguous limbo state of there are no rules. It's just you and me, as you say, Julia. It's just you and me. You are a human. I don't even know what that really means. I'm a human, whatever that means. Here we are. What's going on? And it's very difficult to bring that vulnerability in when and not to trade, you know. I love this metaphor of trading away parts of ourselves for safety. Like you're going to trade away your vulnerability. And what are you going to get? And what's the payoff of the thing you're going to get? And how you're going to get addicted to it and attached to it? It's quite sobering, I must say, to really think about that. I know for many of our clients more than others, you know, the way that people in corporate environments have often traded so much in that very conforming space. And I suppose part of our role as coaches is to help them recover parts of their souls that they didn't even know have been lost and gone missing in the exchange, you know.
Ingrid, I when you said now that element of you and me, then it's just you and me. That something that came up for me there is you and me and the universe. There's for me a sense that that third element, keeping that third element in mind, is a way to being a bit larger, perhaps. It's the moment it takes, because that thing of it's either me, if it shrinks just to self, we've spoken about that, and also relating to other people, whether it's many people or a single person, but just being able to step outside of that for a moment and think, well, it's not really about me, it's not really even about you and me, but we're both embedded in a larger context, a larger process.
It's really cool. Yes, thank you for taking us there. May I ask you your Enneagram style, Rikus?
It's fine.
5. 5. See, you see what's going on here. I mean, that is a kind of, the 5 wants to see the whole of reality, right? I mean, that drive for objectivity could never stop with you and me. You want to see everything. And it's kind of, I would see it as part of an essence quality that a 5 would bring. 5 brings an essence quality of pure mind, and not when 5 goes to 8, the highest quality of 8 is non-dualism, where you don't see any boundaries between self and other at all. It's this infinite flow of consciousness. And so what you're articulating there is, it's not just me and you. There's just so much more going on. And I love that, because one of the kind of themes of objectivity is relationality, that we are factually all connected, that we are all, that the universe is fundamentally kind of one thing. There's one infinite, whatever it is, who knows, but we know that it's not disconnected, atomized, me, you. And also what you spoke about context, there's a larger context, that as our identity expands, we become more and more appreciative of context. We become more appreciative that your way of seeing the world comes from your particular socio-historical context, your education, your family. And you find that as people go into more ego maturity, they develop what's called construct awareness and paradigm awareness. So we start being able to expand our awareness to include different ways of seeing the world. So we're not stuck in a fundamentalist ideology. We're able to understand that people see the world in different ways. And then we don't get triggered by other people's belief systems. We can hold them. And we can hold contradictory belief systems. Same way as we can hold our own shame and our own beauty, we can hold multiple ways of seeing the world. So I'm really glad you included that contextual and relational element, because I think the more we can see relationship, the closer we are to reality as well. The more objective we are. Is there anything you want to say back? Because I don't know whether I've really heard you or not. I kind of went on a trip based on getting excited about what you were saying. Can I invite you to come back in and tell me what's going on for you?
I don't think there's much more I want to say there. Yeah, I just felt that that's useful. Well, two elements. The one thing is if we're talking about objectivity, I think it's good to keep that in mind. But at the same time, it's also a trick, a useful trick. When you do feel small, when you do feel in conflict, when it does feel like other people define you with what they think about you, then just for a moment, just stepping outside, not just of yourself, but even outside of that relationship, and remembering that there is really a lot more going on.
Yeah.
I find that very powerful.
So that's brilliant. I mean, you've used the word trick, and I would say you've got a valuable psychotechnology, which is, okay, right now I'm feeling small and embroiled. Maybe my head is spinning. Guess what? I'm going to remember that the cosmos is infinite and there's so much going on here, and that we're part of something so massive. Like Babette was saying at the beginning, you start seeing things from outer space. And, we're just like in one little spiral arm of the galaxy, maybe. I don't know what you tell yourself in order to you say, step out, step back. But you use that as a way of getting yourself into a more expanded and more comfortable state of being. Yeah. That's really, thank you. That's helpful. And I suppose, that's how I think of all these models. They're tricks. The Enneagram is a trick that we can use to make ourselves happy. So I think we're getting some cool thematic threads that we're pulling out of what is ego transcendence. What does it feel like? How do we get there? What are the benefits? So I like to divide things into descriptive and normative. So descriptive is, what is it? What does it feel like? What does it look like? What is the sensory experience? All of just describing the state. And then the normative is, why bother? What's the use? What's the good? What's the benefit? And it's helpful to draw those two things apart. So we've been mixing them up quite a bit. because implicit in these models is both. Like in the Enneagram, it helps you, it tells you. Are you seeing my screen?
Yeah.
The green
are.
thing. Okay. So in all the models, it tells you what the different states look like and feel like, as well as it tells you what's the point of going on this journey. In Ennealand, it's the same thing again. It's, here's this thing. This is what the heart wound feels like. This is what the ego strategy looks like. At the most superficial, we all know this about Ennealand, is its typology. It's like ones are critical and blah, blah. You know, you've got the whole typology of one, and most people get stuck there for eternity doing typology, as if the Enneagram's a personality test. So there's a lot of description going on. And then, but the Enneagram also very profoundly offers us what is the point of going on the journey? What is the point of going from the ego strategy as a fixation, as a stance, as a rigid way of engaging with reality and with myself, towards something that is responsive, fluid? So Russ Hudson, who's, you know, one of the mega gurus of the Enneagram, if you don't know him, speaks about intimacy with reality, intimacy with experience. And most of the deeper teachers of the Enneagram spend very little time talking about typology. They're speaking about what is the state of being when you are in a responsive and fluid, intimate relationship with your own experience. And it comes down to that. Like if you explore A.H. Almas, this dude, yeah. Can you see his name? So this book has got quite a witty name. It's called Space Cruiser Inquiry, as if you're a space cruiser. And what it's about is the journey of getting here. And basically it's based on inquiry. And inquiry is observing my experience and getting as close to the kind of reality of my experience, the fine detail, without judging it, without bringing that super ego thing. And eventually, if we're intimate enough with experience, surely we'll chuck out the Enneagram. No, it's a lens, it's a tool, it's an overlay that we're using to read ourselves and judge ourselves all the time. And that removes us from direct contact with what's going on. So I would see that at the highest levels of ego development, that I would never think about the Enneagram again. And please God, let that happen one day. That I escape the obsession with the Enneagram. So let me give you a little bit more of kind of tour of some of the ways of thinking. We're already on 5:38. Sure, we're going fast here. I want to just do a check of what would be valuable to you, because I've got lots of slides of different models and ways of thinking, and I want to see what would be most valuable to you, because it could be descriptions of different ways of thinking. It could be some tricks and tips of how this awareness gets cultivated in different traditions. Who's got something that they think would be valuable for this session, for the time that we've got remaining? Hillary.
I might rudely offer something despite having come in late. It's endlessly interesting, and I can tell everything you're going to say is interesting. My mind is stuck on how to make the invitation to ones of a more engineering mindset, if you will, or, you know, they're more in the stuckness rather than the fluidity. How to make that invitation as a real invitation to liberation.
Sure thing. Okay, cool. Because we have to do a lot of that, right? I mean, if you're coaching someone or working with a team, you've got to sell the idea of ego development. And I think that's a big part of our job. So let me go there. So when you're selling it to people in that zone, This is what I do. I talk about, we're going to enhance your metacognitive skills. And in the fourth IR, in the new world of work, if we need to be change agile and we need cognitive flexibility for creative problem solving, then we need to be able to think in more diverse ways. And cognitive flexibility means the ability to do things like move between paradigms, be less stuck in our ways of responding. We need to be more agile. So there's a lot of terminology in the new world of work that makes it quite easy for us to sell the idea of being less stuck in one particular way of thinking. That if you want to be able to deal with continuous change, you're going to need to be more fluid and responsive. You're going to need to be more switched on about how things are changing. And if you've got a rigid ego-defended stance, then you're not going to be able to innovate. You're not going to be able to meet people on their own terms and lead them well. You're not going to have good EQ. So there are a whole lot of functional benefits of ego expansion that it's actually very easy to sell. So you can say to them, are you ready to cross a next threshold towards greater performance? So you can still use the language of performance. You're going to be a better leader if you're less stuck in one way of being, that you can be more fluid. Does that make sense, Hilary?
I mean, yes. And maybe I'm making it bigger than it needs to be. The smart ones very quickly understand that that levels of development are hierarchically stepwise. And so there's some wound to the ego that comes in understanding that I'm not at the highest rung of the ladder. Part of my work, of course, is to deftly de-emphasize this hierarchical stepwise nature, but the really smart ones get it because ego itself, as part of IQ, is extremely deft at that. I think that's what I'm struggling with.
Yeah. I think that's really important because then we bring all kinds of implicit value judgments and make people walk home feeling like they hate themselves. And, they thought they were flourishing and having a happy life, and they walk home thinking they're, the lowest of the dog pile. So I think if you can separate things out as much as possible and also emphasize the stuckness element and the fluidity element. So if you tap into the fact that every single person in the room has experienced states of expanded consciousness, guaranteed. It's part of our human experience to have expanded awareness states, to go into trance when we're singing at church and the whole world disappears and all there is me and eternity and the love of humanity. That's an expanded state of awareness. And you can pretty much guarantee that everyone in the room has had an expanded state and has had a profoundly contracted state. Like Julia, I mean, she teaches this stuff. God knows where she is on the test, but to point out the fact that it's fluid is so helpful, and then it stops becoming like a pecking order thing.
Yeah, and in fact, what we're doing is allowing ourselves to enter into being as opposed to presuming that we're allowing rather than presuming that it's not there for us. I have to work for it. It's naturally there.
That is a really wonderful thing. I agree with you. It makes me very upset when people do panel beating on themselves and harsh self-judgment, and I find it very distressing. And I'm very aware of it as well in my work with teams and whatever, to do what you're saying, to make it okay for people and to feel safe. So I'm glad you asked that question. There's something I want to show you here that relates, I think. There's this, see here what Sandra Maitri says about the Enneagram and the superego as this internalization of composite authority figures. And we can internalize these models and frameworks as authority figures of this is now how I need to be. And we must be very mindful of how we use these tools and stages, the stepwise idea, and to try and neutralize it for people, to say, look, this is a model that's got these ideas of steps. All of us can be anywhere at any time, depending on what's going on. You've all been at the top step. Let's talk about when you were at your most resourceful state. And it was last Sunday when you were singing a hymn. And people have got different ways of describing those expanded states. And I think that would deal with a lot of your, I would say, very legitimate and valuable concern with the ethics of models, if I'm hearing you correctly. Am I on the right track with what you're saying?
Yeah, very much so. Just to speak back, this micro discipline of when are we at our most resourceful self, to keep coming back to that it's a flow state. So that's what, so I take that from the conversation. Thank you.
I did a session last week with a team, well, a group of people on a program I'm running, where I spent the whole session on flow. And it was basically giving them the description of what the flow state looks and feels like, with the absolute knowledge that every one of them has experienced it. And then each person talking about it in the present tense and describing where they are and what they're doing in that state. And it's a wonderful equalizer. Because everyone can describe it. You know, the one person says, I'm stepping onto the stage and I'm about to address 5,000 people about digital strategy. And I'm in the zone. My posture is different. And she took us there. And we all experienced her expanded state. And then the next person was, today I'm learning to fight with a sword. And it's a martial arts. And I think if you can introduce those processes into your teamwork, so that people really do respect each other as full people, you know. I don't know if that's helpful at all.
Beautiful. And respect ourselves as full people, right? And emanate that out. There's nothing wrong with, it's actually a beautiful thing, and to hang out.
And you see here, that's why I put flow here, is like there are different types of self-awareness where we're judging ourselves, we're self-regulating, we're assessing the environment, we're like figuring out, should I do this here, should I do that, what's my problem-solving strategy, oh, I better talk slower. There's a lot of stuff going on at this level. Then as we get closer to flow, there's less of that going on. I suppose it's more implicit. And eventually I used the word Satchitananda. We're in a very blissful and peaceful state of awareness. And in Buddhism, they talk about right action, that it just arises. It's like in Taoism as well. It's Wu Wei. It's the doing of no doing. You don't even feel as though you're doing stuff because you're in flow. That action kind of arises naturally and you're just doing your thing. It's not born out of a place of anxiety at all. Has anyone else got anything they want to add or reflect on? I've got stuff here on, Christian mysticism and the insights there like this, that the state of awareness is a state of contemplative, open, and non-resistant individual presence, which I think is a really good description of like what you were talking about, Babette and Nicole, that you are open and non-resistant. You're grounded in yourself. There's detachment. So I've got slides here on a lot of different systems and the metaphors that are used for these states in those. But I want to just stop and ask, we've got 10 minutes. Any other things that people want to share or reflect on? Abbas? You look as though you want to say something. I'll
No,
put out this.
no, thanks. I can relate with all that I've heard. Like you are aware, Julie, I've not gone through this training, and I would like to take a shot at it, having attended two of them. I think I've taken interest now. And look, all these journeys, I've been through this journey from my own perspective. And I can relate with most of the things that have been said here around. I've moved from that place of self to a place where I look at maybe some people have called it the universe or the public good, something that is bigger than me. And for just like you, Ingrid, I only managed the courage to leave corporate world about 3 months ago after spending over 30 years. Thank you. And that is because I got to a point where I couldn't withstand it anymore. You are in a place where people should be looking bigger, wider than what they are seeing, and taking a different view. But you see people looking at things from their selfish or from their own what they believe is right or wrong. It got to a point that I couldn't withstand it anymore. So I can relate to a lot of the things that have been said.
So it sounds there that in the corporate space, your questions just got bigger, and maybe the concern with something like all we care about is shareholder returns, that your concerns are much more universal, and that wider view, you're not prepared to trade off your concern with more universal questions to be in the safe cage.
That is the way to describe it. And for me, it was more about the humanity, the human aspect to what we do, rather than the goal, the outcome, which is, like you've said, shareholder maximization, value maximization, and growth and all that. Yeah, I couldn't relate to that anymore.
Well, I love that you're bringing in the ethical connection, because I think this is a very, very important thing, is that where we spoke about it at the beginning a bit, but humanity and love, like as our concern gets bigger and bigger, it becomes more about humanity, love, the biggest questions, the most profound ethical questions that we have. And yeah, you couldn't be there anymore because you didn't align with that narrow purpose.
And I must say, Ingrid, it's a very good place to be. I feel free. I feel liberated. I feel, just going with the flow that you have described. That's where I am now.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how much I have in my bank account. I have reached that state of being where I can feel myself. This is who I am.
Exactly. So, I mean, the word you use there that for me is the key one is liberation. And that is a word that's used about ego transcendence. I mean, Buddhism, Hinduism, in Hinduism, the chants are about liberate me, liberate me. The great liberation in Buddhism is the liberation from illusion. And you've liberated yourself from a whole lot of concerns now that you can experience your being in a more truthful way. And those other concerns, like what will people say if you live in a smaller house and don't drive a fancy car, suddenly are irrelevant to you. You don't care. It's like this thing here of performing for an audience. When you do experience liberation, then that stuff no longer constrains you.
Yeah, interesting. I don't have a car, by the way, Ingrid.
Well, there you go. You can have my car. I'm giving everything away. Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's so lovely that you've just crossed that threshold. And it can be very disorienting because sometimes we've been in the state at performing like we're at the top of our game in a corporate and we've got a big budget and we've got a role title and people hold us in esteem, and we leave and there's nothing. Nobody phones you. You haven't got a budget, so they don't give a shit whether you exist or not. You're on your own. And you have to find your way within that. You have to find out who you are. You've got no role. Have you watched that video clip, We All Deserve Styrofoam Cups? Simon Sinek. Yeah. So make a little note to yourself. Simon Sinek, We All Deserve Styrofoam Cups. And it's about transition from having a big role and status and an image to having nothing. And how it adjusts your perspective on reality, because suddenly you realize what matters. And this is what happens when you leave corporate security and a role, that suddenly you realize who your true friends are. And they're the ones who don't care whether you've got a budget or not. Suddenly you realize that what matters is love and connection and truth and humanity. And that's what this transition is about. Internalizing is where your structures fall away and you go through the dark night of the soul and you realize you don't really know what's going on at all. Yeah. So thanks for that, Ova. So your story is helpful. Anyone want to add anything else? I'd like to close with a little meditation that came to mind when you were speaking. Can I do that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to stop the screen share. I've got so much other stuff. If you want me to come back and do another session on this, where I go into more specifics, like what is metacognition? What is the Sufi dimensions? Like if we look at the Sufi model of self-transcendence, what is it? How does it work? What are the stages? We can do a whole nother one of these on other aspects of this if you want.
Definitely. I would love that. We're busy planning for next year, in fact.
Cool. Cool.
So that would be divine. Thank you.
Okay, good. Because I'd love to. I mean, there's so much, and I only scrape the surface. So I want to play you this very, very cool thing, and I listen to this quite often. And it's a Buddhist meditation, and somebody said, who was it? Said something about resting in a more stable, permanent consciousness. I think it was you, Nicola. You spoke about something more permanent. And in this little meditation, it's about, they call that permanent state of consciousness like natural peace. And this is where we're not going to be buffeted, is we're going to rest in natural great peace. And I just like the way that this theme of resting in that consciousness has come out today. Okay, let me play it for you. Okay, hopefully they're no like washing powder ads. Not open. Pardon? You want me to share this? Can you hear? Okay.
Rest in natural great peace. This exhausted mind, beaten helplessly by karma and neurotic thoughts, like the relentless fury of the pounding waves in the infinite ocean of samsara. Rest in natural great peace. Rest in natural great peace. Rest in natural great peace. When you really remember what Masters have done, it immediately moves us. It really inspires, connects us. Therefore, we feel a sense of gratitude and appreciation of their work. So, using Shanambache in this wonderful poem, he says, rest in natural great peace. This exhausted mind, beaten helplessly by karma and neurotic thoughts, like the relentless fury of the pounding waves in the infinite ocean of samsara. Rest in natural great peace. Rest in natural. In Tibetan is rest in natural great peace. This exhausted mind, beaten helplessly by karma and neurotic thoughts, like the relentless fury of pounding waves in the infinite ocean of samsara. Rest in nature, to rest, to find rest. Clear? Just really defining that rest, the comfort and ease, to just to let go and just to just naturally be. Then you see the mind is quietly settled, just like a glass of muddy water. If you don't stir it, the dirt will slowly settle. In the same manner, if you let the mind be in the spacious openness, slowly the confusion or the turbulence of thought and motion settles. Rest in natural peace. Rest in natural peace. This exhausted mind, beaten helplessly by karma and neurotic thoughts, like the relentless fury of the pounding waves in the infinite ocean of samsara. Rest in natural, to rest, to find rest. Clear?
Sure. Ingrid, thank you.
Such a pleasure.
It's always so wonderful to listen to you because, you know, you can figure out and implement what you're saying on such a practical level, and yet it's always so abstract as well. It's like a sort of this enormous, big, double line freeway heading off somewhere gorgeous.
Thank
It
you
is
so
always
much.
such a joy. And I'm sorry to use such a crass capitalist metaphor. Neoliberal.
Highway to Nirvana.
Highway to hell. But it is so beautiful to be able to understand something at both an abstract and practical level. It is so joyful.
Thank
And
you.
it's
Thank
wonderful
you.
to hear how you make sense of things. We
And I
look
love,
forward-
this is obviously the big love of my life since I was 11 years old. So I'm happy to spend 5 years exploring and talking and exploring with people, your own experiences of flow states and, these altered states of awareness. It's just, for me, it's the most fascinating thing about being human. So I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to connect with people around this. So thank you.